Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cindy Oswald. I have been an El Dorado County resident. This is my 35th year, and it's so great to have you here today. I'm a member of the El Dorado chapter of Daughters of the American Revolution, and several of them are here today. Shout out to them for coming. And I retired from the United States Forest Service after a 40-year career. So this has been an amazing project to do with my partner here, Joe Connolly. With that, I'll present and welcome you to the first public presentation of the El Dorado County Gold Star Veterans of World War II. This program is the result of a year-long effort by myself and Joseph Connolly to extensively research and document the stories of 60 Gold Star veterans, their families, and the communities they lived in. 80 years ago, on August 14, 1946, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, Sierra Nevada Post 2680, hosted a formal Victory Day dinner at Placerville Shakespeare Club. As the Mountain Democrat reported, the 1946 dinner was inaugurated by the VFW to initiate what it hopes will become an annual custom. The invited guests of honor were the parents and unmarried widows of El Dorado County World War II heroes who lost their lives in the service. The guest speaker was the Adjutant General of the California National Guard, General Curtis D. O'Sullivan. He remarked that before the war, there was a derogation of our youth, their softness and their ability to take it. I think now that generation has refuted all that was said of it. For those of you who did not go with them on the worldwide battlefronts, it is hard to realize the spirit of willing sacrifice and the invincible courage of your sons. General Sullivan knew that courage personally. During the war, he had commanded soldiers in the retaking of Attu Island from the Japanese Army in 1943. That desolate island at the end of the Aleutian Island chain was where 3 of our Gold Star veterans were killed in action and temporarily interred until after the war. Today's presentation fulfills what General O'Sullivan said in 1946. You will learn who the 60 Gold Star veterans are, where they are interred and memorialized around the world, and how to access their illustrated stories of selfless service, supreme sacrifice, and courage. And before we begin our presentation, we'd like to thank those who helped make this project possible.
That round of applause extends to almost all of you in the audience, especially for being here today in this inaugural presentation. My name is Joseph Connolly. I'm the other half of El Dorado County Stories Behind the Stars, which is a part of a nationwide project that Sam's going to talk about. Like a lot of El Dorado County families before the war, my mother's parents came here from Colorado in the late 1930s to work. My grandfather was a very hard-working logger, and he worked at Pine Grand Mill and did all that kind of work amongst the families that you're going to see represented here today. And my mother graduated from El Dorado High School in the 1950s and joined the Air Force, met my father in San Antonio, Texas, and I was born in Japan. For me, I'm a 25-year Coast Guard veteran, in part because of my parents, and I entered the Coast Guard 50 years ago. This month, I was graduating from basic training in Alameda, went to Hawaii as my first station, and that ended up being a 25-year career. And that's a lot of what brought me to this project. Let me tell you how I got here. Before Cindy and I met last summer, I had already researched the stories of 30 World War II veterans who are named on a plaque. There's a picture of that plaque on one of our poster boards in the back. That plaque's up at the El Dorado County Monument, but nobody could tell me who those people were or where that plaque came from and what the history was of the people in the plaque. And I wanted to know about them, so I set out to research their names, and eventually that's how Cindy and I got connected. And we're both here because we wanted to know who the World War II Gold Star veterans are, and we wanted to tell their stories. And today we can't tell you all 60 stories, but we can tell you how to access all the stories that we've written. And they are an incredible collection of El Dorado County history and wartime history as well. But we couldn't have done this alone. There's a lot of people that I want to thank before Cindy comes back up to go through the details. The first place I went to look for information was at the library. And believe it or not, if you use a library card, you can get free access to the Mountain Democrat archives. And librarian Bonnie Battaglia was the one to tell me that. And that just set me loose to learn the beginning of all the great stories that you're going to hear about today. So shout out to the El Dorado County Library and to Bonnie. And if you want to know a lot about El Dorado County history, go into those archives. There's amazing stories and images. The next place I went was the Fountain and Tallman Museum down on Main Street, and Heather Burnett, the manager there, was kind enough to tell me about all kinds of places that I should go and visit. And one of those was the El Dorado County Museum. And I was there the very next Saturday where I met Rhodey Lee, Dee Owens, and Kelly Jordan, and for many, many Saturdays over the past year, they put up with me as I went through the archives, and they taught me so much history and showed me so many resources to use, and a majority of the images that you're going to see here today are thanks to them. So thank you all, and thank you guys for being here today. Mike Roberts is also here from Save the Graves, and he's the one that actually introduced Cindy and I last fall. I'm not a historian, I'm just a guy who's a veteran with a passion for these stories, and I initially passed off the research that I did to Mike saying, is there a historian nearby, somebody that can pick up the baton and finish these stories? Well, it turns out that it was me, I just had to learn how, and Cindy was the person who brought the resources to do that. And what she brought to this that you're going to see today, the whole power of this Stories Behind the Stars project, is a nationwide effort that she was aware of and that I wasn't. So that's a vehicle that allowed us to do all this work and put it on in a public forum that you can access. The other amazing thing that Cindy brought was how to use Find a Grave. And she created a virtual cemetery, and there's an image back here with a QR code on our display table. And that QR code will open up a virtual cemetery that she created, and you have instant access to all 60 Find a Grave pages for our veterans. You don't have to go look for them. They're all in one place. So you can start right away with learning about them and their families. And then each of those pages has a link that will take you to Fold 3 where we deposited our written stories. So this project wouldn't be what it is without Cindy's knowledge of Find a Grave, virtual cemetery, and Stories Behind the Stars. So I really think that she deserves a round of applause for that. Stories Behind the Stars is a fabulous project that's happening nationwide. Cindy's going to talk about it, but we have been helped very much throughout this last year by Kevin Harrington. He's the state director for California Stories Behind the Stars, and he was here with us on Memorial Day as we gave a public tour. And another helpful Stories Behind the Stars person who lives in El Dorado County is John Turman, who Cindy's going to talk about next. And I also have to thank the El Dorado County Historical Society. We have been so greatly supported by all the members of the Historical Society, especially Jacob Rigoli and Sean Manwaring. When I first met them at the museum, they shared a recent donation of wartime letters of one of the Gold Star veterans here, and that allowed us to see the intimacy of that family's story, what that veteran went through as he prepared for war, the letters between him and his family. And we were able to use those in our story, and it happened again with other people that we met. So they were instrumental in introducing me to the tangible part of El Dorado County veteran history. And on Memorial Day, as you'll see images here, we took the public on a tour of 8 Gold Star veterans who were interred at Neiman Cemetery that are in our project with Save the Graves. And it was just a phenomenal in-person storytelling with members of those Gold Star families. And that was thankfully videotaped and is available on YouTube, so you can watch the whole thing as well. We also met National Forest historian Jordan Sharon. He shared some documents and photographs of another veteran who's in our project. He's not technically a Gold Star veteran, but his name is Arnold Weber, and he has so much to do with Dorado County's military history just prior to the war, and you're going to hear about him as well. Our local veteran commanders have been Crimson Samordos. Seth Culver is the VFW post commander. He's here today. He and Joe Thusen, the Marine Corps League Commandant, and El Dorado Press graphic designer Jesse Eckhart, who's here. They made possible these display boards that you see. They helped us create those and print those, and they were displayed at Memorial Day, and they are here again today. And that's been a big part of how we got here. And then finally, and we have in attendance some Gold Star family members today, and it's an honor and a privilege to share the day with you here. Along the last year, we have been privileged to meet several Gold Star families, and it has been one of the most heartwarming things for us to do this work and to be trusted with your family's history. And we hope that we have done the utmost to share not only the family history, but the Gold Star veteran history. So we're exceptionally grateful for your support and your friendship and your presence here today. All right, that's our thank yous. The rest of what you're going to see is up here, which Cindy is going to start. Very, very briefly, Cindy's going to talk about stories behind the stars, what it is. She's going to talk about our research methods and results, how it is that we created these stories, and how to use the virtual cemetery to read those stories. And what we would like you to do, and she'll tell you more, is pick up the baton and tell people about these. And let's pass the word so everybody can learn about it. After Cindy's done, then I'm going to come up and I'm going to briefly talk about what Gold Star service means for those of you that aren't familiar with Gold Star, Blue Star, and service flags. And I'm going to describe what it was like in 1946, which is the context for this program. What was happening in El Dorado County, particularly with the veteran families. And we're going to talk about that as it relates to where our veterans are today. And then the final part of our program is an 8.5 minute video tribute. You're going to see all the veterans at once in a very, very, very special video tribute.
So the purpose of this slide is just to once again reiterate, we're part of Stories Behind the Stars. That's a nationwide effort, all volunteers, to write the stories of all 421,000 estimated Americans who lost their life in World War II. And I think it was started and open to storytellers starting in 2020. And this is one of the storytellers, John Turnan. He lives in El Dorado Hills. He's not only probably written over 250 stories, he wrote all the stories of his hometown in Pennsylvania, called Tin Men, Steel Soldiers, and has 81 from that town. I brought it here today. Should you join us, you could autograph my book. But he's our webmaster for Stories Behind the Stars. Again, these are volunteers around the world. They're volunteers in other countries who are near some of our American memorials and battle monuments. And so it's you don't have to be a military researcher, although some people are. You don't have to have any special skills. Anyway, it's all volunteer, but the platform is what, and the public access is what's amazing about it. And I just know we have storytellers amongst the crowd here. And one of them is, and I'm going to call you out, Debbie. Debbie's part of our chapter of DAR, and she wrote a book on her father's World War II. So anyone with a commitment to honor a veteran story can be part of this effort. Who are the Gold Star veterans? Joe and I each had a list that when we met, and he had started in August, I in November when we met, and surprisingly, both our lists of who we thought the Gold Star veterans of World War II were pretty close. But He started with what's in the center there, the plaque. This you'll find at the Veterans Monument. He'll speak to it more, but it has 30 names of El Dorado County High School members who died in World War II. So he started with those 30 names and wrote all of those stories himself. I took the kind of fringes of the other names, and on the right-hand side there you'll see there was a Mountain Democrat article done in Memorial Day 1946, and it had a list of names you can't see from your seats, but we were able to use that to then track down other people, largely who didn't go to high school. And that wasn't uncommon back then, to be older or younger or just having to work and not be able to go to school. So we tracked down those names, and those were probably a compilation of what the Mountain Democrat had reported on and what the veterans organizations collaborated on. We reviewed each of our others' work. You know, he'd write a story, I'd take a look at it. I'd write a story, he'd take a look at it. Our sources were, they were everything. They were the Ancestry site, which I'm familiar with, to get the family connections, newspaper articles. We'll talk more about Fold 3 for muster rolls, hospital admission card files, mission logs, missing aircrew reports. And that's what you see on the left. I mean, the ability to look at a missing aircrew report from the National Archives, and this can be found on the Fold 3 site, and you can't see it, but at the top, it mentions how it was declassified in 1973. Well, so the families weren't aware of all the details that are compiled in these missing aircrew reports. It says who was on the plane, what their mission was, where they were last seen, what the witness statements were. So there's a breadth of going to a physical plaque with just a name or a grave marker to something very detailed and specific. Whatever the source was, at the end of each of our stories, you'll see what we used to create that story. So if anyone wanted to investigate for themselves or look into that or had more knowledge or skills or insight, they would at least have a roadmap of where we exhausted and would be able to follow that. And of course, the holy grail is to have an image of this veteran. And there are many you'll see in the tribute we don't have images of. But with the help of families, we've been able to locate some more, and we hope with getting this out there that there'll be more connections and families that will go into those dusty shoeboxes and look at those photos and recognize that they have, an image we can pair with their story. The one veteran I wrote a story of is Frank Vincent. He was born Francesco Vincente in Malta. And he came to New York where he had a brother, and I'm not quite sure how he made it to Placerville, but he did. It was, the 30s, probably looking for work, I'd imagine. He was listed as an electrician. He was living in the Placerville Auto Court, which I estimate was down where the Dollar Tree store is on Broadway. About in that shopping center was the Placerville Auto Court. And I think he worked for one of the local hotels or got side jobs. He became a naturalized citizen 2 weeks before he was drafted and into service in World War II. As I said, he only had the one brother, and he didn't have children. He died in Florida. There were no parents I could probably, so I'm saying, how am I ever going to have an image or a picture? No one would have kept a picture of Frank Vincent of Placerville and Malta. But he had a naturalization record. So I wrote the naturalization service and got his, what's called his C file, his citizenship file. And when I opened up that digital file, when they sent it to me, and I was just like crossing my fingers, and you'll see it in our tribute. We have an image of Frank. He's missing on Palau. He was never recovered. I don't know if he'd ever get to his family, but we have his image, and we have his story. The purpose of this slide is to just show you what I call it the landing page. This is what a virtual cemetery on the Find a Grave website. You know, the title's mine. I own the virtual cemetery, but it allows me to collect all 60 veterans in a list. And those blue, what you might not be able to see, but those highlighted in blue, the names, are actually a link that takes you to their Find a Grave page. Over on the right are some more links if you just want to check out the cemetery that they're interred in, but there's some basic information in a list form. And if you scroll through this, we're starting with Allison, you'd end with Williams at the end, and you'll see through the tribute. But what you're looking at is if you take that QR code or we give you a link, this, for Joe and I, is about the only way we get to our own stories, because it's just less cumbersome to just know that they're on this list and do that. Thank you. And you'll notice we have a bonus story. One more that Joe wrote the story of Arnold Weber. So he's in our list. He's not technically a Gold Star veteran, and I'll speak more to him later, but he's a bonus one. He was an amazing man. He was a commander of the American Legion in 1938. He established the groundwork for establishing the fairgrounds here. Before that, it was at Marcus P. Bennett Park. He was instrumental in establishing the recreational ski industry in California. He was the captain and commander of Company D, and he lived a short life, but did amazing things with that life. So he's included because we couldn't leave him behind. The purpose of this slide is to show you what a Find a Grave memorial page looks like. And the memorial pages in Find a Grave for our veterans are, I'd say, pretty complete. We didn't leave a veteran without linking them to parents and siblings when they had memorials in Find a Grave. There's a lot of information packed on just this page. If you get no further, you'll learn a lot about the veteran by just getting to this Find a Grave page. Ernest Karsten was a P-38 pilot who died in the Netherlands. He was the only son of his parents. You don't see any siblings there. He had two small children when he passed away. On the right-hand side, though, is where you'll find these stories Joe and I have talked about. And the important thing is what he's showing there. Again, it's hard to see probably for most of you, but when you're on that Find a Grave page, you'll go down, there's this gray button. It's really a link, and that launches you to connect to their full story on the Fold 3 site. If you're not in this world, Ancestry is its own site, but it also owns Find a Grave and Fold 3. So they're able to launch the power of all their sites here to have a platform. And Fold 3 is designed, the power behind Fold 3, it houses all these military records of all veterans, all countries, that they have the collections of. But this is all free to use. It's free to go to Find a Grave. It's free to go to their memorials. To access some of the data collections, that requires a subscription of some level. But you can read these, and that's our story. It follows a similar format, story to story, but we call that the Stories tab, that what's circled up there. So we're just trying to get you familiar with what you're gonna, if you go explore this, what you're gonna see. One thing, well, we kind of went back and had to do it. We've gotten so far, and then we said, well, we really should be doing this too. For anyone that's done genealogy or networks and trying to find information, you try and establish, you know, if they were an immigrant and came over and had a ship manifest, you'd look at who they were on the ship with. Well, in the case of our air crews and our veterans that died in air cruise ships, we also listed everyone who was in their crew in our stories, because there are other families looking for the stories of their missing veterans, and they might have a crew photo or a letter that mentions your veteran. And so we tried wherever possible to do a complete listing of the entire air crew, and often it shows up on their Find a Grave memorial as well as their story. And, you know, the power of just search engines. If someone's searching for their veteran and they land on Ernest Karsten's page because that their family member was mentioned, they'll begin to learn the story of their veteran reading who he served with. So look for that if you're in looking at those air crew. This slide is the other thing you'll be able to access off that Fold 3 site. It's a separate tab. It's called Gallery. It's all the images we collected. You don't have to go, he's going to get me back there. You don't have to go searching for them. They're all in a gallery compiled. So this is Ernest Karsten's gallery. That's some of his unit images, some of his images. They're, you know, you're not going to be able to read them back there, but if you see, they're thumbnails. And if you select them, you'll find out he was an expert trap shooter. He won the Pacific International Trap Shooting Championship at 20 years old in 1938. And that's where he is in his crew, there where Joe's got the gold star. But each of those images is a curation of newspaper articles and images we were able to, or data, you know, out of the data collections from Fold 3. So there's a lot to explore in both the written story and the images that accompany it. So, had enough of websites and and that sort of stuff. So I'm going to take you, so we're going to shift a little bit. Ernest, I also wanted to point out, Ernest was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross in 6 air medals. Quite an achievement. So we're going to take you back in time. We're going to time travel back to the 1930s and 40s Placerville, where they couldn't have even imagined computers and clicks and links and websites. The county in 1930 had a population of 8,300 people, and that was the most it had been for years. By 1940, it had grown another 5,000 people to a total of 13,300 people. There was no Highway 50. The El Dorado County High School was the only high school in the county, still on Canal Street, in what was originally a beautiful brick and terracotta building. And the class of 1942 had 117 graduates. No Highway 50, as I said. There was a Union Street, there was a creek, there was a railroad through town, and the Veterans Building where we would be meeting was on Main Street, which is now the Chamber of Commerce. So, imagine yourself back in 1940 Placerville.
So those are all the stories and how to access them. And as Cindy said, now we're going to tell you a little bit about the period of time that this anniversary date was selected for. Starting with the date of August 14th, 1945. That's when the hostilities in World War II actually ended. It's when the Japanese said that they would accept the conditions of the Potsdam Declaration, which was the Allies' demand that they cease all hostilities and unconditionally surrender. And so they agreed to that on August 14th, 1945. And the image on the left is the Sacramento Bee's headline of that. And the Mountain Democrat was a weekly news article, news edition. So 2 days later, in the center image, the county published an article called County Cheers Surrender on page 1. It's a very smaller story than the one in the Democrat, but it was much more celebratory and local. I'm going to read you the first 2 paragraphs. They started out by saying, while the formal proclamation of VJ Day will wait upon the conclusion of arrangements for the Japanese surrender, El Dorado County joined the nation Tuesday afternoon in a noisy demonstration of joy at the prospects of a victorious conclusion of the war with Japan. In the following paragraph, they added, President Truman's announcement at 4 o'clock Tuesday afternoon, and this was by radio back then, that the Japanese had agreed to surrender, touched off fire sirens in Georgetown and Placerville, while the engineers at nearly every industrial plant in the county, quote, tied the whistle down, unquote. So just imagine the noise and the relief that people felt here to know that the war was ending and that there was not going to be any more fighting. The image on the right was published on that same day, on August 16th, 1945, and it was the first formal World War II honor roll published in El Dorado County. And it was published on page 5, and it lists the names of 46 men that were reported killed or missing during the war. And it was put together the day before with the best available sources by El Dorado Post 119 of the American Legion. That list is primarily accurate for the most part, but there was an error on that page. One Marine named Walter J. Tripp Jr. was listed as killed in action, and his killed in action article was also in this issue of the Democrat. But as soon as his friends saw the news, they said, I'm sorry, he's very much alive. And so Walter J. Tripp Jr. is not amongst our veterans. There were also, after this was published, subsequent casualties that had to be accounted for. One of our Gold Star veterans, Corporal Raymond Dixon, he died in an Army airplane crash on September 15th, 1945. And sadly, he was returning home from Europe. The war had already ended. He was coming home to Beale to be discharged. But on the last leg of his flight home, the aircraft that he was on, a C-47 transport, crashed just after takeoff in Missouri. And he was killed along with everybody else but one person. And even though hostilities had ceased on August 14th, World War II did not formally end until the Japanese delegation came aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay And that's what formally ended the war when they signed the surrender documents there on September 2nd, 1945. And that's the date we now mark as VJ Day on our calendars. What's interesting about all this history is when we read these stories, we find a lot of details. And one of those details is that among the Missouri sailors witnessing the surrender signing on the Missouri was Petty Officer Richard Tixman from Diamond Springs. And what's interesting about that is his younger brother Paul is in our story. He was a Gold Star veteran who died in a Japanese POW camp in January of 1943. But his family would not know Paul's fate until sometime later, which we'll talk about. This is probably the best visual representation we can give you of the entirety of our Gold Star service. It's a chronological illustration of everybody's Gold Star date and the year that they died in service. And so we have their names and their rankings, ratings, so forth. And I'll talk about those in general here. But this is all the stories that you're going to see. If you want to read these stories in chronological order, that's a good way to start, because then you'll learn the history of World War II as you go along, and particularly how those events were affecting Dorado County. So as you can see up on the slide, there were 8 deaths in 1942, there were 15 in 1943, 20 in 1944, our highest year of casualties, and then 17 in 1945. These veterans, they served as Army soldiers and engineers, including combat engineers. They were Marine Corps riflemen, Navy sailors, and in the Army Air Forces, they were pilots, bombardiers, and crewmen. 2 of these veterans, Captain William Berriman and Flight Officer George Mitchell, they were pilots who flew with the Royal Canadian Air Force, and they flew in Canada and Britain, respectively. And another, Second Lieutenant Leroy Webb, he flew with the RAF in England, went over there and volunteered with the Royal Air Force because he was already a pilot, and then he came back and joined the U.S. Army Air Forces and was killed in the Los Angeles area. I'm going to briefly talk about some details from this story just to give you an idea of the scope of what we've written about. And as I do, there's going to be a little gold star up here next to that name. Can you go to the first one, please? So our first 2 Gold Star veterans were a pair of sailors, Elmer Fleury and William Herndon. They had enlisted in 1939 and 1940, respectively, and they were lost at sea together on March 1st, 1943. 42, that's my typo. And that was in 1942, and they were aboard the U.S. Navy oiler USS Pecos. They were there together because the Pecos was rescuing sailors from ships that had already been sunk by the Japanese. So Fleury's ship, the USS Langley, had been sunk. He was rescued and poured aboard the Pecos, but the Pecos was sunk by another Japanese attack on that day in March. And they were lost at sea and formally declared dead on December 15th, 1945. So those are 2 of our Gold Star veterans, the very first casualties, and they were never recovered, but they are memorialized. Every one of our veterans, no matter if they've been recovered or not, is memorialized someplace around the world and in our stories. Okay, next. You'll see 2 stars up here that represents 3 different people. 3 of our Gold Star veterans were Japanese POWs, and they died in POW camps. 2 of them, neighbors and high school classmates Eugene Eddy and Eldon Green, surrendered to the Japanese at Bataan, and they survived the notorious Bataan Death March in the Philippines, a 65-mile march, and then a camp and some further logging into an encampment. But they succumbed to malnutrition and disease while they were at the Cabanatuan camp north of Manila, and they died 5 days apart in July 1942. Theirs is an incredible story of faith. They've had the same faith. They were neighbors, classmates, high school football team, and so on, and they died pretty much together. The third POW was Paul Tixman. He was also a Japanese surrender, but from Corregidor. And after being taken to the Cabanatuan camp, he was selected to be a forced laborer in Japan. So he was taken on a hell ship to the mainland of Japan, and he was the 23rd prisoner to die in the Umeda camp in Osaka, Japan, in January 1943. When the prisoners died there, they were cremated, and thankfully, his ashes and the remains of over 1,000 other Allied veterans, POWs, were cared for in a Japanese temple in Osaka, the Juganji Temple. And after the war, those remains were turned over to the Allied forces and repatriated ultimately back to their families. And Paul came back in November 1948, and he's laid to rest alongside his Gold Star brother James at Union Cemetery. They only died 7 months apart, but Paul's fate again wasn't known until after the war, so they weren't reunited until 1948. Okay, next. This star represents 3 soldiers, George Schroep Jr., John Garrett, and Stephen Fairover. They were killed together on Attu Island in the Aleutians. The Japanese occupied the Aleutian island of Attu, and a year later the Americans decided to get rid of them. So they went up to Attu and they were successful, but these 3 died within days of each other fighting the Japanese. George and Stephen were killed fighting the Japanese in the high snow-covered ridges of Attu, while John was a medic, and he was killed when the last desperate Japanese soldiers initiated a bonsai attack. They came charging up a valley to try to defeat the Americans that were advancing, and John was in a hospital tent that they came through, and they killed John and many of the soldiers who were already wounded as part of that attack. Okay, next. And our last example is from July 18, 1944. We have 2 Gold Star veterans who were killed in the same bombing mission, pilot Don Macklin and bombardier Ralph Howland. They were in 2 different planes from the same bombardment squadron, which lost 14 planes that day that were shot down by approximately 200 German aircraft, German fighters. But in 1988, the Buchenberg Historical Club in Buchenberg, Germany, dedicated a plaque to Don and Ralph and 27 other airmen who were lost over that city that day. Not only did they help recover their remains and locate them after the war, but they created this plaque in 1988, and the plaque lists Don Macklin's hometown as Placerville, California. Really, really interesting. No matter where they have been lost or fallen, they've never been forgotten. And especially overseas, they have been remembered continuously since then. And then finally, we have an image in the lower left corner. Our 60 Gold Star veterans were highly decorated, and we have the information about those decorations in their stories. And that includes soldiers Thomas Curran and Henry West, who were each posthumously awarded the Bronze Star Medal for heroism in combat. And the picture you see in the lower left is the parents of Thomas Curran receiving his posthumous award in 1945. Next. This is a very, very busy slide. It's a collage of service flags, but we put this together for those who aren't familiar with service flags, and I presume most of you are, but let me just kind of illustrate it to show you how it affected our part here today in the design of our own service flags. We have a history of the service flags in the back if you're not familiar with what a blue star and a gold star flag are, but those originated in 1917 and 1918, and we have a poster in the back that explains all that in great detail. But generally, a blue star represented an immediate family member in service. So if your son went to war, then you would display typically a gold star or a blue star flag, and that is typically displayed in the window of a home. So around the center image, you'll see 4 images of Blue Star service flags. We have a soldier sitting on his front porch with a 1-star flag. Over to the left, you see a wife and her veteran's son outside their home with a 2-star flag. And below that, a mother with a 3-star flag, and then across another mother with a 4-star flag. So that represented their members of their immediate family in service. In the upper right, we have a combination flag. That on the other side, that's a flag from an orphanage on the East Coast, and the blue stars represent all the wards who were in the service. And that image of the 5 people you see are the Gold Star wards from that orphanage who were killed in service, and their gold stars on the upper part of that flag. And then if you come over to the left with the 147 and 2496, that's a flag from a college in North Carolina that represented all the Gold and Blue Star alumni who were present in the war or had been killed. And then finally, the image in the center, that's an enormous service flag that was put together by the Southern Pacific Railroad. And that image was published in August of 1944 by the Mountain Democrat. They ran a weekly series called The Sphere of Service, which is a 1-page, huge repository of everything you wanted to know about every veteran in El Dorado County, what they were doing, if they got promoted, wounded, if they were home, and so on. And they put this image up as part of those stories. And it shows that the number of Blue and Gold Star service members participating from the Southern Pacific Railroad. So these flags came in many different forms, and they were in use by homes, cities, towns, and organizations to represent all those people that were serving from those respective places. And over here to the right of the stage, you're going to see this flag. I'm going to walk over to it. These flags you see up on the screen are the motivation for us to create a flag that represents our 60 Gold Star veterans. And so this is an image that we created ourselves using these flags and this history as a model. And you'll see another example of a variation of that in a couple of other slides. But there's 60 gold stars on here, and they represent the 60 veterans that we researched and documented in this project. All right, this slide is very specific to honor rolls and gold star flags in El Dorado County. It's taken from those Memorial Mountain Democrat archives, and it shows images of 3 Gold Star veterans from our county, and they're mentioned in the Mountain Democrat archives as they appear in Gold Star honor rolls. In the center left is Henry Hansen, and you'll see these illuminated in gold as we click through them. So that's Henry Hansen, and he was an Army Air Force's B-24 pilot, and in the El Dorado National Forest, he was a beloved employee who was a summer guard at Echo Lake, and Echo Lake is the image that you see in the background there. After the war, there was a proposal to name a local mountain peak in his honor because he was so beloved by his fellow Forest Service employees, but that doesn't appear to have been approved beyond the El Dorado County Superintendent. But they certainly wanted to do that. And when you think about Sky Moat, we have a mountain peak here locally named after him. Well, that inspiration was the same as what they wanted to do for Henry Hansen in World War II. In the upper right, you see illuminated, is a picture of the Georgetown ME Church over to the upper right of the screen. At the far end of the Church Street, the west end, it's now on the east end. It was moved after the war. But this is a picture thanks to the Historical Museum that is located, and that's the church that Reggie and his family would have attended during the war. And in that church, they had service flags and gold stars, and his was one of those that was represented. We have a bigger picture of Reggie in the back, but he was born in Mosquito, and he was a railroad engineer at the time of the war. He worked at the Pine Brand Mill, running trains back and forth with the wood that they cut out from the trees. And when Reggie went into the war, he was in the Marine Corps, and he served at Guam and at Iwo Jima. And at Iwo Jima, he died of wounds after being struck by shrapnel. He was actually hit by shrapnel twice, but it was the second time that he was struck that ultimately led to his death. He died of his wounds after that accident. And the fighting, particularly for him on Iwo Jima and for his unit, was so fierce that of his company, only 7 members survived. So just imagine what he went through and the members of his company. In the lower right, we have another picture of Hardy Tatum. Hardy was an Army Air Force's B-26 pilot, and to the right-hand screen, you see the Federated Church, where Hardy went to Sunday school as a boy. And during the war, his parents went to services there. And his family came to El Dorado County and owned a large pear ranch along what is now Mother Lode Drive. And in Hardy's letters back and forth to his family, he was always giving his father grief about not working too hard at the pear ranch. He wanted him to get into what he called the business end of things. So he was very concerned for his family and the ranch, as he was also hearing about his family's concern for him in the war. Hardy and his crew were lost at sea when their plane unexpectedly exploded over the Mediterranean on Easter Sunday, 1943. And his gold star was the first placed on the church's service flag. We're still looking for images of those service flags, and that's something that if you know of, we'd really love to find those and put those in our history projects. But this is what people read about, and these are the places where they saw those service flags in World War II. And we wanted you to see what that was like for El Dorado County residents and the families of these veterans. Next. Okay, now to explain, to summarize the history of all our veterans after the war, we want to talk about briefly what happened to them. That was one of the most shocking things of this for me. Next. When we were done writing these stories, you're writing one story at a time, and it takes some time to absorb that story, but particularly it takes time to absorb the whole of all those stories. And when I took a moment to look at what we had put together, the most shocking thing that I realized is that half of the 60 Gold Star veterans from Dorado County that left did not come home. They didn't return to the United States in one form or another. During the war, those that had died overseas, they had been interred in temporary overseas cemeteries that were created by the movement of armies through battle. They had to bury people, but they also had to bury them in a location that wouldn't be subject to the goings back and forth of the fight. And then after the war, as permanent national cemeteries were established by the American Battle Monuments Commission, 13 families ultimately elected to inter their Gold Star relatives in those new permanent cemeteries overseas, where they fell in the war. 16 Gold Star veterans, other Gold Star veterans though, remained missing in action or were unrecovered, and one was buried at sea during the Battle of Okinawa. Next. And then for the 30 veterans who did return, 26 were interred in California. 2 were interred in the territory of Hawaii, 1 in Missouri, and 1 in Pennsylvania. And of those that came back and were interred in California, 18 were interred at private cemeteries in El Dorado County, Sacramento, Auburn, Modesto, and Mountain View. And the other 8 were interred at the Golden Gate National Cemetery in San Bruno. El Dorado County, in particular, is the resting place of 11 of our Gold Star veterans out of the 60. 8 are interred at Placerville's Union Cemetery, and the other 3 are interred at Placerville St. Patrick Cemetery, the Jayhawk Cemetery and Rescue, and at the Georgetown Pioneer Cemetery. And what I'll say about this before I move on is when we show our tribute to the 60 veterans coming up at the end of the presentation, each slide is going to list where they were interred or memorialized. And all those stories that we've written include those details, including when they were repatriated. And we've worked very hard to tell you those stories so you can honor their entire service. Not just they're going to war and they're being killed in war, but what happened to bring them home and the respect that they were given when they were laid to rest here. Next. So 1946, the period of time that we're celebrating today, was a monumental year of post-war reckoning for the Gold Star families. On August 14th, 1946, as they were attending the Victory Day dinner at the Shakespeare Club, 17 of their sons were still missing, unrecovered, or buried at sea, and they would not return. Other sons were interred in temporary cemeteries, as you see here, in Okinawa, the Philippines, Tarawa, Iwo Jima, Attu, and all throughout Europe. And their disposition at that time was still undetermined. That had yet to be decided. In the center of this image, at the top, are 4 Marines visiting the temporary cemetery of the 3rd and 4th Marine Divisions on Iwo Jima. That's where Reginald Dar was temporarily interred in grave number 1851, row 38. In the upper right is Little Falls Cemetery, where soldiers George Schroth Jr., John Garrett, and Stephen Farover were laid to rest after the taking of Attu Island in the illusions from the Japanese. And the large image in the center bottom is the scarred landscape of Bedio Island in the Tarawa Atoll, where Richard Canepa was killed in action with fellow Marines. And his remains are yet to be identified, although that effort is still ongoing. In the lower left, the flag-draped coffin or soldier is a scene from Okinawa. That's Marine Colonel Francis Fenton. He's kneeling in prayer over the flag-draped body of his 19-year-old son, Private First Class Mike Fenton, who was killed in action on May 7, 1945. 4 of our Gold Star veterans were killed in the Battle of Okinawa. They were soldiers Willis Williams, Gerald Potts, and George Longstaff, plus Marine George Blackburn, who was buried at sea after a kamikaze attack on the USS Bunker Hill. And in some cases, the search for missing airmen is still ongoing. Don Macklin's mother, Alvina, was notified in November of 1946 that his remains had been recovered from the area where his plane had crashed in Germany on July 18, 1944. And nearby, the remains of Ralph Howland and 9 fellow crewmen were also recovered. But due to the severity of the crash when their plane hit the ground, they were interred in a group burial at the Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery in Missouri. And that was a common practice that the military made rather than the families regarding group burials. And then finally, I think it's important to understand that during the war, wartime policy, and this is something that I've learned, had forbid the transfer of remains back to the families until the hostilities ceased. So that precluded or extended the mourning process for families. They weren't able to reconnect with their loved ones until after the war. So finally, 6 months after the war ended, the recovery and final disposition of the remains buried in temporary cemeteries like this began, and it continued through 1951. If you were an El Dorado County family, or any family in the United States, this brochure that you see on the left called Disposition of World War II Armed Services Dead would have been provided to you by the U.S. government, and it told you what choices that you could make to have your loved one brought home or interred in another area. And this went over the family's rights and the choices that they could make, and if they wanted to make an alternate choice, it told them how they could do so for the War Department to make that final decision. So the 4 options are listed on this slide, and I would just briefly just mention what they are and how many people chose that. The first choice that was listed in the brochure was interment in a permanent American military cemetery overseas. These are the cemeteries that were created by the American Battle Monuments Commission. And as you can see here, 12 families made that choice. The next choice was to return to the United States, its possessions, or its territories for interment in a private cemetery. And 19 families made that choice. The third was interment in a private cemetery in a foreign country, or the homeland of the deceased or of their next of kin. And there was one family that chose that. He's in a war cemetery, but it's not one that's an American-run cemetery. And finally, the fourth choice was to return to the United States for interment in a national cemetery, such as the National Cemetery Golden Gate, and 11 families made that choice. And it's also important to know, and this is in the brochure, but it's an important part of the history, that no matter what choice a family made, the U.S. government bore all the costs of their removal from temporary burial locations, their preparation for reburial and casketing, transfer to the site of final interment, and their burial. And we could have a whole other program dedicated to just that process. It was so honorable and respectful and organized. It started before the war to plan for this process. And amongst these choices, it's also important to say what honors were given. If you chose option number 1, for example, a military chaplain would conduct appropriate religious ceremonies at that time of reburial, and then the family would be notified of the location of that permanent burial site overseas. And the other options, 2, 3, and 4, it's important to know that a military escort would accompany your family's remains to the place of interment. And if the family chose to have them attend the cemetery, then they could stay up for 72 hours to attend the services that the families had. And in these stories, again and again and again, it was our local VFW, American Legion, and other organizations that laid these veterans to rest. And we've documented that in all of our stories. Next. All right, this is an example of this whole process illustrated, and that was an example of one of our veterans, about temporary interment, repatriation, and then permanent interment. So if families chose a national cemetery for interment overseas, or here in the United States, the American Graves Registration at the time promised them that the flag that they fought for will wave majestically and projectingly over their graves every day from dawn until dusk. And the families were also assured that the names of those veterans would be perpetuated. So for example, if a veteran was not recovered, on all of these national military cemeteries, there are their names etched, and those are called the tablets of the missing, where thousands and thousands of veterans who were never recovered are still nonetheless memorialized. This is Henry Chappelle American Net Cemetery and Memorial in Belgium, and presently there are 7,992 American military dead at rest amongst the cemetery's 57 acres. And in the colonnade that you see at the top of the picture, there's the names of an additional 451 missing, who are etched on the walls of the colonnade, and those tablets are missing. Along the bottom are some pictures of Henry Chappelle as it was being established during the war. It was established on September 25th, 1944, and it contained all the major battles dead from Northern Europe through March of 1945. And ultimately, the cemetery was completed in 1960 and formally dedicated on July 9th that year. So on the bottom left, you see a 1944 burial. That's what the cemetery looked like as it was being utilized. And lower right, you see a woman grieving after the grave sites had been more formalized in 1945. And in the center, you see the same scene, but this is from this year's Memorial Day cemetery, program at the cemetery. So the soldiers are marching by in respect of those graves that you see pictured on the left and the right of them. One of our Gold Star veterans, technician 5th grade, Robert Smith, is laid at rest at Henry Chappelle. He enlisted in the Army at Salinas in April of 1943 after he worked in Dorado County. He worked here as a ranch hand in Mud Springs and Missouri Flat, and he also worked as a lumber handler for the Placerville Lumber Company at Fresh Pond. He was killed in action during the Battle of the Bulge on December 18, 1944, temporarily interred at Henry Chappelle, and then his family elected to keep him there after the war. Okay, next. And this is our last slide, I believe, before we introduce our video. We have one more tribute slide next. But this is just to illustrate how the repatriations came about. They were done by ship from throughout Europe. Exhumations were made and caskets were loaded. And what you see on the right is the U.S. Army transport Joseph V. Connolly, no relation to me. And that ship was selected to be the first to bring home European repatriations. And they left Antwerp, Belgium in October of 1947 with over 5,000 casketed remains. And that process began at Henry Chappelle. Those were where the first European repatriations started from. And when the Connolly sailed into New York City, they sailed into New York, and there was an enormous gathering of New Yorkers, 400,000, to witness the caskets being unloaded, and there was a big ceremony to welcome them home. And on the left, you see what was happening in the Pacific. The Army Transport Honda Knot was the first to bring home repatriated remains from the Pacific, and they actually were the first ship to land of the two. They came into Oakland in 1947, and they had over 3,000 casketed remains from throughout the Pacific. And all of this was planned before the war started in very careful detail, because the greatest respect was given to these veterans in their coming home. And the U.S. government wanted to make sure that that was a priority.
Okay. Purpose of this slide in this segment is how you can help. Again, I'll reiterate, there are storytellers among you. If you want to join Stories Behind the Stars, this is the tally from about last week. 93,000 stories have been written by volunteers of the 421,000 Gold Star veterans of World War II. And that every veteran, Gold Star veteran in Arlington has been written about, who died at Pearl Harbor, who died at D-Day. There are units, there are, people who tackle states. Our state director for Stories Behind the Stars, I estimate he's written about 2,000 stories himself. So there are storytellers among you, and so you can always help tell the stories and become a storyteller. If not for Stories Behind the Stars, please take the time to record the stories in your family and pass them down. You already helped us out today by coming and letting us share with you what we've gathered about this amazing sacrifice done by these 60 veterans. If you know any of the families or you recognize the names and they want to connect with us to give us images or better images or more details or correct what we've written, we're here to do that for them. You can contact us at Stories Behind the Stars at Eldorado County Historical Society.org, and we have that on some of these posters, or see Joe or I. Please, another way you can help is supporting the veterans organizations that exist in this community. It is very satisfying to see that they have a legacy of helping these veterans. They were there for these Gold Star families then. They're helping veterans today. That's the VFW, the American Legion. I see Mike Metz here, Diane with the Military Family Support Group. They do sacred work to help these living veterans every day. So support them, and they've been here 100 years. Support the El Dorado County Historical Society and Save the Graves and the County Museum. That headstone you see of Robert Gerard Kelly, that's one that the Save the Graves has taken on, getting markers where there are none for our veterans in the county, and that was put in Union Cemetery on May 22nd this year, right, Mike?
Yeah.
And that work,
We want to do it now.
Yeah.
3 came in.
3 came in. So he's continuing the work to make sure there's a memorial here in the county for those veterans that were laid to rest here. So support those groups. The fraternal and faith organizations in this community. I'm a member, where are my DAR members out there that came today? I told Joe, I said, we're the living descendants of the original patriots of this country 250 years ago. So whether it's our organization, the International Order of Odd Fellows, the Sons and Daughters of the Golden West, the Masons, they were all there for these World War II veterans families, and they're in our community today still doing that work. I want to give a shout out to Jessie Eckert, who did our posters. Joe mentioned it, she's here today. And a shout out to Paul Anderson. This is the first time this audio system has been used in a presentation, and I'm glad that the veterans spent the money on improving this audio system for this room. There's a lot of history here. And one thing I want you to be on the lookout for, and I think I saw him doing it today. Tucker Anderson worked with DFW Post 10165, I believe, and he did his Eagle Scout project on hometown heroes. Not necessarily our Gold Star veterans, but the banners are going up on Main Street, I think, as we speak, and another wave will be going up in October, and they'll be up through the holidays and the Christmas tree lighting. So take time to look at that and have faith this younger generation is honoring veterans as well. And the other thing, this is from the World War II Museum. It acknowledges that there were 16.4 million Americans who fought in World War II. And last year, in 2025, they estimated only 45,000 are still living. I looked at the number today is probably 30,000. 40 World War II veterans die every day. They will soon be gone from living memory. And so this is our tribute to them, that they won't be forgotten. This slide on the left is that Company D we made reference to, that was assembled by the American Legion in they started in January 1941. This picture was taken in March 1941, where they assembled a National Guard unit of at least 65 recruits. So these are all volunteers. These are young men volunteering to be part of this unit. On the left there, That's Arnold Weber. He was the captain. To his left was Fred Schumacher, a Forest Service employee, landscape engineer. I love the little dog. We know what the little dog's name is, but we have to relocate the article. They also had a mascot that was a little pig that they called Tricky, who couldn't go to camp with them. But this is them at Marcus P. Bennett Park, assembled. They trained for a couple months, got on a bus to Roseville, and then got on a train for San Luis Obispo for more training. But these 65, I think at the end there were nearly 85 from El Dorado County. They got spread across the globe. We have 3 of our Gold Star veterans, Raymond Dixon, Lotta Schmierstall, and now it's gonna fade from my head. And Don Macklin, thank you, Joe, that didn't come home. But there are probably many in this community who did welcome home, and that's their send-off. They had when you read the articles, they had parties for them, and 300 people showed up at 1:30 in the morning at the Greyhound station to see them off, if you can imagine. So anyway, and the statement you see at the bottom, that's what was on every presidential memorial certificate given a Gold Star family. And so there are many families who kept this memorial certificate that acknowledged their sacrifice and what that meant to the country at the time, signed by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And then probably just, we have some veterans we hope will still come home. That I was talking earlier to a family that the defense, it's called the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency. We could make it any harder. But their mission is to provide the fullest possible accounting for our missing personnel to their families and the nation, and they consider it filling our nation's promise. There are globally 71,000 Americans that have yet to be recovered. 3 of our veterans went down with the USS Indianapolis. Now, where the shipwreck was found in 2017, it's an official military war grave for everyone who went down with that ship. But it lies at 18,000 feet at the ocean floor. But there are efforts to bring home the missing from Palau, from the Hurtgen Forest, all over the globe. We have veterans that died in India, all the way to Romania, to North Africa. It's amazing the breadth of where they serve.